This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. We're now in season 6. Thanks to all of you tuning in and sharing the podcast with your friends to keep the momentum going. This podcast is dedicated to all things horse and all things that uplift equine well-being and welfare. And I'm having down-to-earth conversations with equine professionals about the little things that move the dial slowly but surely towards a better world for horses. You'll find all the episodes, 93 and counting now, on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for being here and enjoy the ride. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here on the Whole Horse Podcast. And today on the podcast, I am welcoming back a very favorite guest. We're here again today with Dr. Tracy Rainwaters. Welcome back, Tracy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. I'm so excited to be here again.
I am so, well, I'm always excited to have my guests on, but we just had this little chat before we even got started today. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so good.
It's going to be fun.
Tracy had messaged me after the most recent podcast. If you haven't listened yet, go and listen, because we will probably be coming back and checking in about it, which is the podcast with Lockie, Phillips and Elsie Reford. That was my episode 104. And Tracy messaged me to say, this really landed in a big way for me and resonated on these deep levels. And I was like, let's chat.
Let's go there.
Let's go there. Yeah. So before we start, Tracy, maybe you can just share a little bit. We've had the one podcast with you. If you haven't listened, go on back and have a listen. It was so good. But for today, maybe a little bit of why that podcast sort of hit a chord for you.
Yeah. So I've been a little quiet about sharing this experience online and with my clients, mainly because it's taken me almost a year to sit with this experience and to really decide, like, A, what do I want to share and how do I want this to roll out? And I think it's taken me this long to feel safe enough to do that. So last September, I had a pretty serious health event where I had felt like, my hormones, my health, I'm in my 40s now, like definitely felt like my body was changing, had been through multiple doctors, spent thousands of dollars going to naturopaths to try and figure out what my body needed. And that all culminated last September with me having a really severe health event where I started a hemorrhage. And I found out through this event, I was actually having a miscarriage. So I wasn't even fully aware that I was pregnant at the time. And come to find out, I was diagnosed with fibroids, which is what caused all of this to happen. So as many of you guys know, my husband and I bought a farm. We live out in Western Washington. We're on 20 acres, 30 minutes from civilization. And this event turned into a hemorrhage. I was home alone. My husband was out of the country at the time. And to be super direct, I almost died on my kitchen floor. And it really took me into this really deep place of how much I have not been honoring what my body needed, what my soul needed. I was putting my career and my clients and my relationships, everything came in front of what I needed. And what I so resonated with you talking about was like this collapse, but also this immediate need of how we kind of get these little glimpses of like, I'm not okay. Like I need to rest, but really overriding it, because for me, I tend to overcommit. I tend to say yes. And it comes from a really authentic place of wanting to be of service and wanting to participate and do good things in the world, but doing it to the point of absolute physical collapse. So when you and Lockie were really talking about, that experience, I, was sick at the time. So I was laying in bed and just started crying because I'm like, I so get this. I understand what it's like to live my life in this chronic state of fight or flight, on my interior, really feeling on my own human level that I wasn't enough. So I had to go out and achieve and do. I went through high school and immediately into undergraduate work. I went to summer school every summer because I had a horse to support. And the only way my parents would really help pay for my rent and my horse was if I was going to school. So I went to summer school every summer. And then I went right into chiropractic school, and I went right into launching a business during a major economic crisis. So like when I look back, I'm like, I have just been living in fight or flight for, several decades and never giving myself a break. Like even as my practice grew, there was financial stability. I was always living from this place of like, it's all going to fall apart. And if I don't go 100 miles an hour, it's all going to fall apart. So it's been nearly a year, since I've been dealing with these health issues, and I would say overall I'm doing better, but there's been lots of ups and downs. When I was listening to this podcast, I hit again, like just another low point of, in so many little ways, not honoring my body, worried about growing this aspect of my business. And is it going to be okay? And, it took me into another state of I got COVID, and first time I've had COVID, and it completely knocked me out. So yeah, that really, I messaged you, and I'm like, I'm laying in bed, like silently sobbing, because it allowed for such a deep release. And I feel like this is such an important conversation that relates to so many other things. I think with us and our horses, the horse industry, like there's a lot packaged in that. And I was just so grateful for you guys for having the courage and the honesty to have that conversation.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. Cause I know that, like it's a vulnerable share, right?
Yeah.
I think I felt that too, going, oh, like I've had to do so much work to not feel weak for experiencing something like that or going through something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing, no, like this is my body actually sharing important information about what it needs. My spirit sharing important information about, what wants to happen going forward. Right?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. And I don't know if you felt this, but it was like this interesting feeling of like, is it okay to admit that I'm not okay?
Yeah.
Like it feels like it's a thing that I dislike about social media is that everything looks like everything's great and everybody's thriving and their businesses are everything. Yeah, everything's perfect. And I think we all know that's not true. But it also feels like this weird thing, like, is it okay to actually talk about my health and what happened? Like in a very honest way, and not just to be like, well, I have this health event and I'm sick and I need some time off. And I found the more, in a way that feels appropriate, I've talked about it, like the more women have come forward and been like, oh my God, like I've had similar things. And it just feels like we're all silently suffering, but not having these really honest conversations about the experience and just trying to get to this point to where, okay, so we can keep pretending like everything's just totally fine.
Yeah.
And I don't think it serves anybody.
If I just get back here, then I'll be cool. And
totally.
Everybody else can be comfy again with what's going on for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah. I remember when I was first sick, I posted, this is what's going on. And it was just this weird thing to have to kind of keep posting and say, oh, well, actually, news now.
Update. Yeah.
Like this happened. Oh, like this happened. It's just this, you kind of got to this place where I almost got, that first announcement. Okay. And then it was like, oh, good.
Yeah.
I really had to kind of train myself to, it's okay. It's okay to not be all right. And I noticed one of my patterns was I would post and they would always try, I think you'll get this, always try to find the ray of sunshine. What's the silver lining? I'd always try, oh, what did I learn from this? Or what did,
yeah, but
like, this sucks so bad.
100%. And I feel like, at least what I'm coming to, I'm like, no, like that deep work actually comes from just sitting in the place of like, this is really hard. Full stop. And and again, even now I'm doing it. Well, I know it won't be hard forever. And it's like, yeah, it won't be hard forever. But in this moment, like these are really hard things. And I think to really move through them in a way where we really get the depth of the healing and the depth of the experience, like we have to be willing to sit and just, this is hard. This sucks. This hurts, and not qualify it in any other way. And I'm still, it's a constant practice of like, how do I do this in a really authentic way?
Yeah.
Work with it.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed is I went to one practitioner. I actually didn't, it was like a, consult call of like, should we work together?
Right.
So I'm telling her the story of what happened. and she's, real down to earth, cut through the bullshit kind of person.
Right.
She goes, do you realize you're masking with humor?
Well, I do now. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I do now for sure. But it was true. Since then, it's become more of an awareness of will say something terrible that's happened to me and be like, oh,
Yeah,
something
exactly.
funny. And it's like, okay, what's that about? Like, why can't I just stay with the emotion and the somberness, frankly, of that sucked.
Yeah.
That was hard. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to laugh it off. No. I don't have to sugarcoat it. I don't have to make it more palatable for people. It's okay to just be with what is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about, what does it mean to really hold space? Now we talk about holding space for our horses. I feel like I see that a lot in the equestrian community. And I feel like, even in my work, like, I feel like I do a good job, like, of holding space. Like, I can go to a really dark place with people. So it's an interesting thing of like, well, why do I not give myself permission to just sit in that same space of like, it is okay to not be okay, and I feel like I'm making these connections now as we're talking. It's like, I think part of like, how do we make this better, for the people around us, the world around us, and for the animals in our life? It's like really being able to sit with things not being okay and not having to fix it. Yeah. And I feel like it's sometimes with our horses too. It's like, I've had some really complicated emotional issues with horses and having to help them through that. And I think we always want to make everything okay and better. And I'm like, sometimes things just need to be messy without repercussion, without punishment, without judgment. It just needs to be messy so that you can see a pathway forward. But that's hard to do. It's just hard to do.
It's hard. And isn't it so common? Maybe some of the listeners are resonating where, okay, we're in that hard place and all we're looking for is an escape.
Yeah.
Just get me out of here somehow. And we make maybe a decision that's impulsive. We, say it's a horse that's having a challenge. We maybe shift them into a medical situation that isn't maybe necessary, or we change their environment in some really drastic way, or we just kind of go almost into I know I do this. I panic.
Yeah.
Get me out of this. Right. Yep. I want to move that feeling rather than go, 100%. Okay.
Yeah. And I think we sometimes lose sight of, and again, I've learned this the hard way. Like sometimes, or I shouldn't say sometimes, I think often the fastest way out is directly through. It's not trying to like fix it. It's like that really efficient way is like, can you just sit in the messiness and breathe? And often that I found with myself will move whatever needs to move. And then there's a pathway forward. But when I keep dodging that feeling, it's like you're just circling around something without getting to the heart of it. And I think we very unintentionally prolong a process we don't want to be in.
Or we make it worse.
Yeah, or we just compound it. It becomes so big that we have no choice but to really sit in it. So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before we started recording about compassion fatigue. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because I didn't just get a message from you. I got a message from several professionals, like people I really look up to in this industry. Yeah. Saying almost the exact same thing. Like I started weeping when I listened to that episode. This is what's happening for me. I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's so interesting that you're saying that. And thank you, because I've had this like idea and this hit, and I'm not really sure what this is going to look like, but I feel like as professionals, we need a community to where we can openly talk about this stuff. So I've been like playing with this idea of like, how do we create a platform where we all, and for me, it's like sort of like, well, can I help us as professionals? Like, can I create this space where we can come and like have these honest conversations? Because working in animal healthcare or working with animals professionally is exhausting. It's not just our feelings and trying to help these animals, but you're also filtering through the feelings of the owners, the trainers, their hopes, their dreams, their ambitions. And for us sensitive souls, like it's really hard. It's really, really hard.
There's so much there, especially like, maybe not especially with horses, but I find I'm always balancing this piece, that knowing that this is an animal that's come from incredible ancestral harm.
Mm-hmm.
We're carrying these not only in the moment of, okay, this is what's showing up for me, say with body work or whatever, but then also holding this space of this horse and their ancestors have been put through incredible amounts of violence, and there's this trajectory of what's been happening kind of in their space. And I find as well, that sort of sits on me of like, okay, how do I help this?
And I really noticed too, and it's just like, it's been this quiet observation for a long time. Like, as I've really, in the last few years, stepped into more of the spiritual work, more of the shamanic work, there's like this thing I've noticed, like if we really start getting into how horses feel about their job, how they feel being in their body, I feel like it unconsciously triggers so much shame in the humans. I think it's this buried sense of, a lot of us know, like, our training methods, what we're asking these horses to do, some of the environments they've been, whether it's been by us or by others, like there's a lot of injustice there. There's a lot of overriding the deep wisdom and really acknowledging that these are deeply emotional, sentient beings that may not love their job. They may not love being ridden. They may not love going to horse shows. They may not love training 5 or 6 days a week with this deep, intensity. And I feel like I've just noticed, I feel like it brings up a lot of shame in people that then comes out as anger, and then they want nothing to do with it. And it's like, well, I'm just going to go. We're going to go back to training. We're winning. We're riding. Everything's fine. When I'm like, everything's not fine. Everything is really not fine with your horse's body and their whole being. So it's just been an interesting thing of like, how do we navigate that? And I don't feel like I have it sorted, other than it's having these conversations and like having this awareness that there's so much more here than just physical well-being, tack and equipment, shoeing. I mean, all of those things are wildly important, but it's that other and piece.
And I'm going to come back around to the compassion fatigue piece, but I just wanted to ask around, I would always have this really interesting thing that would happen when I worked on horses. Mm-hmm. So I would go out, and it was almost like my intuitive self would figure out, it was one of my superpowers, I suppose. Now I look back and go, ooh. But I could figure out, okay, how far can I push this person?
Oh, okay.
Right? Like what can I say? What tone of voice? How can I share information so that it doesn't land on a wall, so that it doesn't create essentially a block in this human around their shame or around their particular guilt or around, like the ways that they've chosen to be in relationship here. Like, what are my boundaries? What are my edges? And I often found in a session, that was a lot of my work, right? Was how do I translate this information in a way that's actually going to be received? Because if I say it too hard, if I say it too direct, if I say it, in this way or that way, then I get, maybe resistance or a wall or a change, or that horse no longer, has my care, or you know what I mean? Like there's these changes that occur because of that. Is that something that you've worked with at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's shown up a little differently. So I really felt like my full understanding of who I was as an intuitive being has really been fostered by the horses in my practice.
Yeah.
And when I went through my shamanic training, it was like this door got blown open where it's like, oh, I understand. And as I tried to bring that into my practice, now granted, this was 12 to 13 years ago, I felt that general way I would present it. It was either met with, like, I felt like I had this narrow band of clients who were like totally on board. I felt like the bulk of my practice, the people, because it just felt like they were these high performance riders, and they were like, okay, yeah, whatever. And it just felt like it just got discarded. So I really sat with it, I think, in a very quiet way for a long time. And I didn't always know. And I think because I was inherently such an introvert, very shy person, like, how do I I was not comfortable at the time having these uncomfortable conversations and just throwing it all out there. That has definitely been a journey for me. So I felt like I took a lot of that pain and just made it internal, and I carried it, which I don't recommend anybody does. That it really serves absolutely no one. I've also had the really hard journey of also really advocating for horses and feeling like it fell on deaf ears. I've been released from some really high profile clients just for saying like, hey, this training program isn't working for this horse. Like they can't, it's like they need more time, they need more space, and just being let go for someone else who will just shut up and do the job. So it's like I was also carrying that too of like, I also have to, I was single at the time, and I'm like, I have a mortgage and a life, and like, how do I navigate? I just didn't know early on like how to navigate this in a way. Because I felt like even without the spiritual piece, just advocating for the well-being of the horse just felt like, well, you'll get fired for that. And I did, even when it was done with a lot of compassion and kindness. So that was part of my compassion fatigue too. It's like, I just want things to be better for the horses, which will actually make the people happier and to create this happy harmony. And I feel like now, like there's such an opening, but it just felt like that first 10 to 12 years of my practice, like I felt like I was running up against a brick wall, and seeing some of the way these horses were treated in training kind of behind closed doors. And I'm like, this is not elegance and grace. This is slavery, and it's unkind. So, but yeah, I think, energetically, I just took on a lot that I've been, it's just taken a long time to unravel that and to find my voice and how do I help here. But
yeah, I think when we're working this edge as, coming to a space, wanting to be supportive, helpful, the compassion fatigue is so, it's like right there for us in terms of, because I think you're like me and we love our jobs. I love working with horses. It's the kind of catch-22 of this scenario is, I love working with horses, and it's also tiring. There's both.
It's been this thing of like, oh God, my career was like some of my greatest sense of joy, for so long. I loved getting up every day and going to work. And, about 12 years in, like something shifted where there were so many times I'd like go and work on horses and then get in the car and cry. Cause it's like, like I'm so grateful for this life and for this job. And I love that I get to help and support them. But they're going right back into a situation to where kind of putting them back together to be in a really dysfunctional competition system. And, what do I do with that? I think many people know now, veterinary medicine has one of the highest rising rates of suicide. Like we can't ignore, and I really feel like as owners, like we have such a responsibility to understand this compassion fatigue in our veterinarians and our body workers, our dentists, our chiropractors, our farriers. And I feel like we all have to take responsibility in how we treat the individuals who are really giving everything that they have available to help our horses. Even if it's not what we want to hear, even we have to return to being humans and being kind and seeing that these jobs are actually really hard. I've always felt like I give so much to all of these animals, and I put so much of my heart and the relationships with the owners mean the world to me. The relationships with the horses mean so much to me. So there's a lot of me that is very emotionally invested in my career, whether other people see it or not, so
and I think another piece for me is realizing every bit of that is a bit of grieving as well. It's like every client that you've loved and then had pulled or that you couldn't help, or something is out of your control on that level, right? It's like I know for me, one of my big grievings this year is like I haven't been able to work on horses because I get too tired traveling. I just can't do it. And it's been like, these are horses that I've been working on because our careers, it's so funny because I'm 43.
I am too.
And our careers are almost like my career. I've been an equine sport therapist since 2005. So so 18 years. And so I think we're like kind of in that similar boat. And so I'd been working on some of these horses for 15, 16 years, like a long time. They're part of my family. They're part of my herd. And to have to be like, okay, like I thankfully we have so many amazing body workers here on the island, but it is still like, oh my gosh, like I've literally watched the life cycles of your horses. I have supported them through their life to their passing, and to, go, I can't make it to you. I literally can't drive to you with just this like, oh gosh, okay, like this is
hard.
so hard to be with, right?
I mean, when we moved, I knew that like I needed my job to look differently. I couldn't work in the volume and the capacity that I was. And then, obviously moving out of state, this is just not, I'm going to have to show up differently. And I knew moving to Washington, only vets can do chiropractic in this state. So I knew that, my career was going to be really cut down. And I was actually excited because I knew it's what I needed. But I think I just undervalued like how much grief would come with that. Because again, it's clients that I've had relationships with for 10 to 15 years. I've watched their kids grow up and go to college. I have some clients that I met them and started working on their horses when they were like 13, 14. And one of them, she's now an equine chiropractor. And, and so I've watched them like grow up and become professionals. And a lot of them work in the horse world, or they've become chiropractors. And like, that's such a privilege. But I didn't realize also in having to scale back, it felt like I came home from one day from work and I was crying. It was right before we moved. And, I told my husband, I'm like, I feel like I just had 7 breakup conversations back to back to back, knowing that I can't see the ball, and I missed the horses. I missed the people. And then now in this last year, as my health has it's like my body on some level is forcing me to really rethink how I do my job. And it's been deep grief because it's my identity. It's also the love that I have for the clients and the horses, and not being able to participate in the same way, and to not see them face to face is really hard.
Yeah.
And it's also forced me to kind of be like, okay, well, who am I now? And that's a whole other level of, it may not have been super healthy, but I always identified doing this one thing and like showing up in the world in a certain way.
And being great at it more than likely, right?
And that's been like the hardest ego death of all. It was like, no, I was great at my job. Like people valued what I did. And then I moved to a state where nobody knows who I am. Nobody cares to know who I am. And there's so many times like I'll see horses and be like, oh my God, I could really help. And I can't. And I just have to sit in. To them, I'm just Tracy.
Yeah. Wow.
So that I'll fully admit, that's been an ego thing that's been hard. It hurts, it's sad, and it's also really hard.
Yeah, well, it's been so fascinating working, I work with a few different professionals and things. I was saying that I literally just came from a somatic experiencing session. But I've had this through this work, this realization that we go through these phases, whether we know it or not, right? Yep. So it's like, we might think of it as like maiden, mother, crone, or whatever you want to consider, right? Yeah. And this idea that, I'm 43, but I'm, there's a start. My body is actually saying, I would actually like to nudge towards like your crone, your sage state, where it's like, you don't have to be constantly proving yourself.
Yes.
To be worthy.
Yes.
You just are, and it's okay.
It's a weird thing. Like, I kind of love getting older, and I wish someone would have told me when I was younger that like aging is actually awesome.
Yeah. Totally.
In some ways, it's hard. It's hard to see my body be different, but I totally get that. There's a part of me that's like, that this crone, this sort of juicy phase in life where you're not running to prove yourself. It's like, no, you've done it. And now you get to share, and you get to be, and you get to foster other people as they go through these younger phases. But it's hard. It's like hardwired in my neurology just to go all the time. So
welcome to the club.
Yeah. But I was telling you before, I'm doing this breathwork certification this
Yeah,
year to
so
do
exciting.
to do holotropic breathwork. And I'm so grateful for the mentor who's teaching this course, but he's very steeped in Jungian psychology. And he's really kind of helped usher me through this phase because he was like, well, you are like in this midlife moment that it shows up different for men and women. And I don't feel like I'm in like a midlife crisis, but I'm definitely in this midlife phase. And he said it's very normal for women. You know, as you come into your 40s, it's like, well, I've been doing and caretaking, and now I want to go live my life. I want to go expand. I want to be who I am because I've been in service for all of these years. And for me, that really resonated. And I do feel like I'm in this weird midlife point of I've got a foot, I'm straddling this line and I've got a foot on either side. And I'm really learning how to navigate, just fully stepping over into this different phase of my life. And my ego's just fighting it really hard.
It's a little battle going on.
Yep, totally. So,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Oh, amazing. So if we can
Yeah.
everybody embrace the crone, embrace the sage,
Yeah.
let yourself
Absolutely.
just garden and bird watch and, pet your
Dilly dally.
horses and just dilly
Yeah.
dally about. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's been like the biggest thing for me is, like I can just do that. Like, right. I could just go in the garden and weed things for a while. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to
Yep.
be unproductive in that regard. Like, right, these sorts of pieces, I think for so many of us, it is a battle.
Yep.
It's so challenging to let go, surrender into not having to prove yourself, not having to prove your
Yeah.
value, not going
Yeah. And I don't
100
know,
miles an hour.
maybe this will resonate with somebody. I don't know if it's resonated with you, but I've also really had to change how I engage with social media
Mm-hmm.
as I've gone through this process. And actually, Lockie, I have to say, like he posted something and this gave me huge permission to unfollow a lot of people, not because I don't love them. And it's not because I don't think they're doing amazing things in the world, but I feel like anything that takes me away from my center or makes me feel like I'm not doing enough, makes me feel like I have to hustle or do or be, or I'm somehow not keeping up. I've had to like with a little prayer just unfollow them. And again, it's not because I don't love and value what they do, but it's like I'm in this journey and I need my social media to be fluffy kitties right now and cat stuff and nature stuff and gardening and I will always support my equine colleagues and everybody. Like I'm supporting you energetically, but I just can't have it in my awareness because it's taking me out of this process that feels so vital for me right now. And it's been a weird thing to navigate of like, I really need to unfollow a lot. And not because I'm being jealous or spiteful or all of these judgy things that I'm telling myself, but it's like, this is taking me away from my truth and how I can share in the world. So it just needs to go away for right now. And maybe I'll pick them up later,
Yeah.
but it's like, I'm loving you and supporting you energetically. I just can't, it needs to be in my life in a different way.
It is so interesting because, I mean, when we talk about something like co-regulation, for example,
Mm-hmm.
when we're in this because we're like little baby chicks right now in our little new
Yep.
phase, right? Like we're
Mm-hmm.
really, figuring stuff out. It's like our nervous system's like, how do I
Yeah.
do things this way? And I think it's really valuable to point out, like, say something like that, but also, it's okay to surround yourself with things that allow your nervous system to be in this new state.
Yeah.
Right. And
A
that
hundred
includes
percent.
people and images and
Yep.
music, like, really helping yourself, almost imagining I am rewiring right now.
Yeah.
And like, what is conducive to that? Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like you're this person. I'm such a doer that I'm like, anything that makes me feel like I need to be more of a doer and try harder, I'm like, that can't be in my life right now. It
Not at this
just,
moment.
not in this moment. Yeah.
It doesn't say that you're not going to pick it up
Hmm.
again at a certain time where you can stay centered and in yourself,
Yeah.
down
100%.
the road. But like right
Yeah.
now, in this fledgling state. It's hard. Like I get swept up in the productivity waves real easy at the moment.
I know. It's so, excuse me, it's so easy to do.
Totally.
Yeah. And my body goes, no, thank you. We're not doing that.
Don't need that. Yeah. Well, I wanted to change gears a little bit because we promised to talk about the spine for like
we'll get there eventually.
1.5 episodes. Right. So I was like, okay, we're going to talk about the spine.
We'll talk about spines. It's all related.
As a short little breather for the middle of our podcast, I wanted to share that if you're interested in the Whole Horse Apprenticeship, you'll get some more information about how to register at the end of this podcast. And for the first 10 people that hear this little message and go to register, you get $50 off by using the coupon DIVA50. That's DIVA 50. So there you go. I hope that we see you there.
And both Tracy and I love spines, and we've learned lots about spines. And I think one of the fascinating connections that we don't always think about with this topic is to the more emotional and spiritual aspect. And when we're thinking about horses, spines are always going to need to be top of mind. If we're going to be riding, especially, got to think about spines.
Yep.
And our spines and their spines. So would love to hear from you, Tracy, because I'm sure that with these not even new aspects, but these more recent aspects that you've been learning about, overlaying your chiropractic experience, what have you learned about spines and this nuance of more emotional, spiritual? Yeah.
Well, I really feel like the spine is the gateway to health on every single level. And so when I went to chiropractic school, I had this very kind of unique experience in that when I was picking schools, there were two very prominent schools in the chiropractic world, and they had schools on the West Coast and in the Midwest. And one of them was very philosophy based, and they were going through some accreditation issues. So for me, that immediately took them out of the running, not because they didn't have wonderful reputations, but I'm like, I couldn't invest this time and money into something where like accreditation was being reworked. So I ended up going to a school that was on the West Coast. I went to a Palmer school, and we went to a chiropractic school that was very much, their philosophy was that we were to be educated in a way to where we could integrate into conventional Western medicine and converse with orthopedic surgeons and really be this integral part of the healthcare system. So I feel like I got a wonderful education, but what I didn't get was the heart and soul and the philosophy behind chiropractic. So what's been fun for me is I feel like I'm coming full circle in learning that, you know, when chiropractic was developed, it was really seen as not only are we affecting physical mobility in a positive way, but it was really designed to help realign the energetics and the chakra system of the spine. And I feel like that has been completely washed out of chiropractic, as it's really, there's always been the struggle to legitimize what we do and to be taken seriously as medical professionals and as doctors. So, but I feel like I've come full circle in that, like, our spine is the gateway to our health. It houses our spinal cord. It allows for movement of the whole body. But I feel like if we look at a lot of these beautiful transition segments in the spine, they really relate to the chakra system as well. Like in the horse, like if we look at that lumbosacral junction, like that is the seat of that second chakra. If we look at the thoracolumbar junction, which to me is so critical in lateral flexion and mobility in the spine, it's, you know, and that's where the back of our saddle sits. Well, that's the third chakra. And in my shamanic work and the energetic work, most horses have third chakra issues. Now we can say it can be equipment, it can be biomechanical, but I also feel like if we look at horses and the third chakra, it's like their center for personal will and how they can express their will in the world. Well, we've, for the most part, have really completely taken that away from them. So if we're looking like, yes, we need to look at equipment, and saddle fit is integral. The biomechanics of how we're training and riding these horses is absolutely integral. But if we're doing everything, body work, chiropractic, saddle fit, veterinary work, to help the horses in their spine. And if we're still having problems, well, how is your horse's sense of will and their sense of agency in their life? Like, if that's a problem, none of those other pieces are going to fall into place. And I have watched this happen for almost 2 decades, where it's like the best vets in the world are helping horses. We've got unlimited resources to explore equipment and veterinary care and body work, and these horses still aren't thriving. And I feel like I've been shouting into the void for all this time that it's like, because there's spiritual, there's energetic, and there are emotional issues at play, that it's like a puzzle piece. Like, you don't have a full pie, unless all of those pieces of the pie are fully integrated. So the spine to me is the gatekeeper for all of this. And like how the chakra systems, the energetic systems move in the body. Spinal movement is integral for health of the spinal cord, the peripheral nerves, for our lymphatics, just for cohesive movement within the body. I mean, all of these things work together, and it can't just be science and biomechanics. In my mind, like, we have to look at them from a whole being approach, which isn't just physical and equipment and shoeing. It's, what is their spiritual life like? All of our animals, there's no doubt in my mind, like, they have these rich spiritual lives. Like, how are their emotions? How are the energy systems in the body? All of these layers to me need to be addressed in the humans as well, but it's an important part of spinal health. It's not just biomechanics. There's so much more there.
I love that, because, well, you're going to find out. Tracy's one of our guest instructors for the whole apprenticeship this year.
So excited.
Yay! And we get a lot into chakras and meridians and how to balance them and all the things. And it is just, that overlay. I think when we're looking at something like the spine, there's so many lenses that we can actually view it through, right? So like the chakra system, but also, okay, we have all of our nerve impulses, both parasympathetic and sympathetic, coming through the spine into the viscera at different levels of the spine. So at certain levels, we're having, digestive system innervation, or, all these pieces that are coming back and forth and affecting into the system and back to the spine and back to the brain. And I think, it's just, when we can start to step back and have that more holistic view, like, I'm sure you've seen this, but like, I know I've seen this, where a horse that is having so many physical issues is then bought by another person, put in a different environment with different enrichment, different friends, whatever it is, more connection, more choice. And all of a sudden their body stuff
like dissolves.
It's just gone. Right. And usually there's a bit of a moment, the thaw, 100%. Generally in there, but this sense of, okay, well, that spine all of a sudden is functioning in a totally different way with these other factors taken care of, right?
Yeah. I have done work with, there's an amazing vet in the Bay Area in California. It's Dr. Diane Isabel, and she really is a spinal specialist, and she's incredible. I mean, this woman can diagnostically ultrasound anything in the spine, and she's brilliant. And she has an off the track thoroughbred that, he won like millions of dollars on the track, raced, well into like middle age. And she, acquired him, when he was retired, and he lives out in a field with a bunch of horses. I mean, he lives like this very natural horse lifestyle, but man, if you look at the inside of this horse's body, he has one of the most complicated cases of kissing spine at the base of his withers. I mean, you look at it and you're like, how can this horse be happy being ridden? How can this horse be sound and happy and functioning? But again, it's like you look at the interior of his body and it's a hot mess, but he doesn't palpate sore. He's happy to be ridden. He's absolutely sound. Like, his life is so full and integrated that it's like, he's, on radiographs and ultrasound, he's got this stuff, but it's not affecting his life in any way.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like such a big reminder for people that I think we get so caught up into diagnosing and figuring out, and then we create this story around what is in our horse's body or what is in their behavior. And it's like we put them in this cage of like, oh, well, my horse has kissing spine, therefore. And I think we're really in this time where we really need to start looking at things differently. And like my young horse Felix, like, yeah, he's got some stuff in his body, and yeah, he's got some things that aren't ideal. But I've also decided, like, I don't label him by these things anymore. That I'm like, they just are. He's able to do everything I need him to do right now. And he goes out into a field, he eats grass, he plays with his friends, he's happy, his body seems happy. And we're just going to take this to a place that, you know, feels good for him on every level, instead of identifying by these pathologies and then deciding that only so much is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
It totally does. And, you know, doing osteopathy, especially on people, I really, spines are fascinating. I love working on spines. But one of the things that we really learned is like, you could have an incredible scoliosis, for example, in a human spine, where you're like, whoa, you know, I've had one patient, her shoulders were a good 2 inches different on either side, but it's functional. It's functional for her. It moves. The things that need to happen. She doesn't have pain. She's living her best life. Right? And so it's this, we get, that sense of the diagnoses. It's like someone gets like a scoliosis diagnosis, like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing. Whereas it could be totally functional for you. Not even a big deal. Right. And I think, like you say, that we can get obsessive about the diagnostics.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, if there was any wish for my life and my life's work, it's if we can start opening people and for them to really start getting curious and exploring, like, okay, this injury is showing up in my horse. Or I'm sure you've seen these people where they're like, I'm just going to pull something out of thin air, but bought a dressage horse and the right hind suspensory, 3 injuries, can't be rehabbed, go buy another horse, another suspensory. You know, it's like these patterns just keep showing up. So it's like, can we start getting curious as to the deeper, like, why is this showing up in the body? And not just from a biomechanical kind of fatalistic perspective of like, oh, this thing just happened, but really getting curious of like, is there a deeper thing that needs to be explored on the emotional, the spiritual, the energetic, whether it's in the horse or the human? Like, what is the wisdom that needs to be acknowledged in this so that we can fully integrate this experience and then hopefully release it so we don't have to keep calling it in and we don't have to keep attracting it. And often I find, you know, if we can really understand the energetic factors or the emotional things that are driving symptomology in a body, you know, it often makes the healing process, to me, more elegant. It can happen very quickly. And I just feel like when horse and rider are really in alignment with their shared mission and their shared goals, like I've seen things that I would qualify as a miracle happen in healing. So to me, it's just like, if we can all just open and expand our mind a little bit, that we aren't just physical bodies walking around having this experience on earth. Like, there's so much more that we can offer in the healing and the health process of really being fully integrated beings. And I feel like the spine is like the harbinger. It's like that telltale first sign of like what isn't working on every level.
Yeah. Like I was talking to you before the podcast, my, shall we call it Achilles heel is my dura. So for those of you who don't know what dura, we've talked about it, Elise and I talked about it in our craniosacral podcast, but essentially it's the outermost layer of the 3 meninges that surround the spinal cord and the brain in the cranium. And it's this fully connected from ethmoid to sacrum tissue. And it's very interesting. The other thing that I will say, I'm slightly off topic here, but I had a relative come in recently and I was like, oh, you have dura things too. So some of the, you know, I often wonder with that.
You're like, look at us with our ancestral stuff.
With our ancestral stuff. This is so interesting because same sort of thing. I would have cyclical migraines. So I would have a migraine about 7 days before I started bleeding, almost like clockwork, right? Until I started doing osteo and started to work with my dura and my sacrum and my cranium and you know, uterosacral ligament, all these things. But still my stress pattern from when I was very, very young is my dura will tighten and just squeeze my little spinal cord.
Yeah.
And it's like my body goes, this is the thing that will put her to bed because I cannot stay standing. When it's happening,
yeah,
I have to lie down.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's wondering if this is a thing for you, for me, it starts to pull sort of at my eyes and behind my nose, and my shoulders I almost go into a fetal position. My neck starts to get super tight. My shoulders come up and forward. And all I want to do is compress the top of my head or hold my eyes.
Oh, wow.
Is how it comes up for me. And it's this distinct pattern. Like I know now, oh yeah, it's happening. And the only real thing that I've been able to find relief around is I need to go to bed. Like,
yeah,
I need to go lie down in a dark room, have a sleep, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like my body is saying, hey, okay, you've pushed it too far.
Yeah.
Off you go, you know?
Yeah. And so as you were talking, I was thinking, it's like the way, and let me know if you feel differently, like the way I view like the dura mater is it's like this great source of stability for our central nervous system, right? Like it houses everything. It keeps that cerebral spinal fluid in place, but it also anchors to our spine.
Totally.
And so to me, it's like, I'm not beautiful as you're experiencing it, but there's some beautiful symmetry and just intelligence to the body to go like this thing that's meant to provide stability and support can't do its job anymore. It's like you're no longer in a stable, supported place. Yep. So like you need to go to sleep. You need to go into your safe, stable little cave for a while. But what a different perspective, right? Because I feel like, especially when I'm the one having the physical issue, it's like this immediate fear and panic for me comes up of like, my safety and security in the world gets triggered, whether that's irrational or not, you know.
And you kind of I go into a bit like, no, not again, you know, like.
Yeah. And for me, it's always, I don't have time for this, which is the most laughable comeback to a health crisis. It's like, well, darling, you haven't had time for this for X amount of years, so you better make time now because you have no option.
Yeah. Schedule it in.
Yeah. But I always like, I just get, I'm like, what do you mean? I don't have time for this. Like, that's funny. Like,
well, I learned actually fairly recently that they found that the dura is actually almost indistinguishable from the fascial body.
Amazing.
So when it comes out through the nerve root endings at the vertebral levels, it's like, it just integrates with the fascial body from that point on. And I was like, wow, like, okay, so literally our nervous system connects physically to this
web.
One web that covers every tissue of our body. And I've seen it in clients, and I see it often with impact injuries. So like MVAs or falls off horses, let's be honest, where their body, it's almost like the fascia. If we think of it like water, the impact hits the body, and the fascia turns from fluid to frozen.
Yeah.
And you've probably felt this too. I felt this in a few horses recently. And it's been just fascinating, where I can literally feel this almost like a statue for a portion of the body or the whole system, that because it's so interconnected, it's like, this is not moving at all. And what I find so interesting is if we look at it from a more holistic spinal perspective, a nervous system perspective, because if I went in just like, oh, well, I need to work on the impact site, you're not going to get very far.
Yep.
Because you're working with a nervous system problem.
100%. So I've got a 4-year-old mare that I bought her as a foal. She arrived on our farm at 18 months. Like around her second birthday, I turned her out with all the horses, and she was going through a phase where she would like really like bronc around like in a circle, and she would like leap around. And she had one of those moments where she like bronked and then reared like all at the same time and like just launched herself vertically straight up in the air. And thank God the hind hooves actually like went to the ground, but then she just sort of crumpled on her right hip. So it was a soft landing. And I'm so glad I saw it happen.
Yep.
But at the same time, like, and she got up, she like shook, she lay down and rolled again. And so like she did what she needed to do to kind of help her nervous system in the moment. But how that has affected like the next 2 years of her life has been really interesting. And I have to say, never took a lame step.
Yeah.
And I could see how this is where I'm an advocate from the moment these horses are born until the moment they take their last breath. They need supportive body work regardless of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because it showed up at the thoracolumbar junction first. Mm-hmm. There was like this compression in her spine. But as she's grown, it's actually been the left coxofemoral joint, and it's the fascia. It's not a joint issue. It's not a muscle issue, but it is. It's like her fascia. It's probably 6 to 8 inches in diameter where it's like glued and it just doesn't move. So it's just been an interesting thing of like unwinding that. And I'm learning so much. And I'm like, again, it's not at the trauma site. It's the opposite side of her body. So yeah, it's just, our bodies are a matrix. And I feel like I don't even think we fully tapped into what fascia is.
No, I don't think so.
The horses keep telling me it's like a crystalline matrix in our body. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface on even what that means. But yeah, I feel like there's so much we don't know, and it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating, but I think the next decade's going to be really interesting. That I really feel like it's so much more than what we thought. And it's completely made me rethink of like doing muscle biopsies on horses, or anytime we have to cut through the fascia. Like I have become so protective of that. I'm like, that is not something you take for granted.
No, that's scar tissue that is going to be impactful
everywhere,
all over.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if it's not sewn together perfect, if it's off, like to me, that can be a career limiting thing. And I don't think we think about it that way.
It's huge. When I see scar tissue on a horse, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? What meridians are affected? What chakras are affected? How is this affecting the spine? How is it affecting the visceral? What's going on with the skeletal system? Like it's huge. And I think in osteopathy, it's like, I think third highest priority in our methodology, below global vitality and compaction lesions. Like it is way up there, and we don't take them very seriously. Like I've seen horses with like barbed wire wounds that I'm like, what has this gotten dealt with? Like we both know what releasing even externally a gelding scar can support with, right? Massively helpful.
And the amount of like dents and dings that I see like over the brachiocephalicus muscle around the points of the shoulder, that people just, it's like, well, he's always been like that. It's like, well, but it's cold. Like for one, like when you start getting into some of these things, there's like no vitality. There's no blood flow here. Like this affects, everything.
And have you seen the dissections where they show it going inches into like that one of those little dents could actually extend, an incredible distance into the body, into the muscle belly, and, into other tissue. So it's pretty incredible.
Huh. Fascinating.
So interesting. Okay, well, we're gonna have to keep talking.
I know. Well, I'm so curious about, as an osteopath, I feel like as a chiropractor and an osteopath, we're kind of walking this parallel path. And I don't know, it's like now, like in hindsight, I feel so much alignment with osteopathy, and I find it so fascinating. And I feel like you guys have such a richer perspective, especially like on all the viscera and how that informs everything else. So yeah, so many interesting conversations that could be had.
Oh gosh, yeah, so many interesting conversations. I admit I'm an addict for working viscerally. It's really just so cool. So yeah, I would love to get more into that, because it's I hope to in the future do more training viscerally with horses. Because I think that it's sort of an area where for many horses, it's an issue.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get really dealt with. More kind of, not external factors, but other things are being addressed, because there isn't a lot of trained professionals doing visceral releasing for horses. So Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I feel like we could chat forever and ever.
I know. Well, thank you so much. So it's always great to be back and connect. So thank you.
Yay, good. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I just want to give you a minute to share with the listeners where to find you and how to get in touch.
Yeah, so my website, it's just www.tracyrainwaters.com. I'm the most active on Instagram. It's dr.rainwaters. And even though I was saying, my Instagram is all about fluffy kitties, I mean, I do still post stuff that's meaningful for me, and you can find out more about my work. And I am really good about responding to messages there. So either through my website or through Instagram is the best way to get me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tracy.
You're so welcome.
Yay. Hey, everyone, and thanks for listening into the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm here today with my friend, colleague, and going into her 4th year of the Whole Horse Apprenticeship, Elsie Reford. Thanks for being here, Elsie.
Thank you. I just wanted to pop on and say a few things about why I love the apprenticeship so much. I feel as though the apprenticeship has changed my life with my horses. And as a person, I have met so many amazing friends through this online container and been exposed to professionals and extremely caring horse people that I did not even know existed prior to entering this space. So I will always be grateful for Alexa and the amazing weaving she does between her bodywork knowledge, animal communication, and her ability to connect people from around the world in a common mission to bring horse people together for the betterment of the horse.
This year, Elsie's going to be back with us more in the capacity of an assistant and helper and mentor this year. And I'm really stoked that she's joining us. And I hope that you decide to join us as well. We start on September the 15th and registration is now open. If you'd like to register, this is a 6-month container. I try to keep the cost really accessible for everyone as much as possible. And if you don't have horses, totally okay. You can still come. Anyone with a love of horses is welcome. To find out more about the 6-month offering, you can head to bit.ly/apprenticeship-2023. Again, that's bit.ly/apprenticeship-2023. We hope to see you there. Bye for now.